The judge was halfway through praising the defendant's discipline when the little girl lifted her hand, just a small motion, barely noticeable. But one man saw it, a retired royal guard seated in the back row, and he recognized it immediately. It was the international distress signal, the kind used by hostages, the kind that means I can't speak, but I need help. So what did the guard do next, right there in a courtroom in front of the judge? Before we reveal that, hit the subscribe button and tell us where in the world you're watching from in the comments below. Now, let's begin. The Crown Court's air hung heavy with formality and old wood polish. Royal Guard Edward Ned Holbridge sat utterly still in the back row, dressed in a civilian grey suit that felt too tight across his shoulders. His ramrod posture betrayed 12 years spent holding line and silence before tourists, royalty, and sometimes threats. In this courtroom, there was no ceremonial uniform, just the instincts that never left a man who'd guarded a nation's symbols. He wasn't there to testify. He'd been asked to attend by a friend, Detective Inspector Mallory, who'd worked with him on a palace threat drill years back. "The case is murky," she'd said over stale coffee that morning, "and I have a bad feeling about the child." Ned had glanced at the docket. Julian Merrow, KC. Fraud, coercion, obstruction. Standard white-collar filth, he'd thought. Not his business. But when he entered courtroom 3 and saw the little girl seated beside the defense bench, something shifted in his chest. The warning bells that had kept him alive through 2 tours in Afghanistan began to chime. She couldn't have been more than 8, with a navy cardigan too thick for spring, buttons done to the collar, and hair parted with military precision. She didn't fidget like children do in boring places, didn't twist around or swing her feet. She sat upright, perfectly obedient, eyes down, hands folded, still as death. The woman beside her, polished, pearl-wearing, kept one manicured hand on the girl's shoulder. Not affection. Containment. Ned stared a moment too long, and the girl's eyes lifted, startled then withdrawn. They locked eyes for just 2 seconds. A jolt of recognition passed between them, soldier to prisoner. Those weren't the eyes of a child who'd been brought to see Daddy's trial. They were the eyes of a captive, trying not to scream. Julian Merrow, the man on trial, was a creature of practiced elegance. Thin smile, sharp suit, silver cufflinks, barrister's voice buttered in charm. The kind of man who'd convinced half of London he was brilliant, and the other half that they should be grateful for it. Clara, that was the girl's name, Ned would later learn, stayed frozen beside Julia Merrow, his current wife. The girl's stepmother, a woman whose smile never quite reached her eyes. The judge entered, court rose. Ned did too, but his eyes never left the girl. He wasn't there to guard the palace or the law, but something told him he might be the only person ready to guard that little girl. Julian Merrow took the stand with the confidence of a man accustomed to commanding rooms. His voice rang with authority as he answered questions, occasionally smiling toward the jury as if lecturing admiring students. Ned watched him closely, not for the words, but for what happened when he spoke. Clara shrunk further into herself with each syllable. Every word seemed to tighten her shoulders, as though his voice carried weight only she could feel. "I've always believed in structure," Merrow was saying. "As a father figure, especially after such tragic circumstances, one must provide consistency, routine, stability." The judge, Sir Malcolm Green, nodded approvingly. "Very commendable, Mr. Merrow. Your continued composure reflects precisely the kind of discipline we value in public servants." Merrow bowed slightly. "Thank you, Your Honour." Ned's jaw flexed. He noticed Clara flinch at the word discipline. Her gaze remained locked on the floor, a child trying to vanish. The defence continued. "During the time your late ex-wife was dealing with instability, were you the primary caregiver?" "Yes," Merrow replied. "I took full responsibility. Clara needed stability, and I gave it to her. There it was again. Stability, structure, discipline. Beautiful words dressed as virtues. But Ned knew how words could be weaponized by people in power. Clara hadn't looked up in almost 20 minutes. Then Ned saw it, subtle but clear. Her sleeve had slid slightly. A pale patch of skin was exposed. Purple, round, faded yellow rings around it. Bruises. Not from playground tumbles, the kind that come from adult fingers gripping too tight. The stepmother noticed too, because with rehearsed grace she reached down to adjust Clara's hair, pulling the cardigan sleeve down in the same movement. The girl didn't protest. She didn't blink. Routine. The judge leaned forward. And the claims of domestic manipulation and coercion, those levied in your ex-wife's statement before her passing, were never substantiated? Absolutely not, Merrow replied calmly. She was distressed, unwell. And guardianship was handled according to her will? Merrow nodded. As per legal documentation, Clara remains in my care. Green turned to the jury. You will disregard any insinuations not supported by evidence. Mr. Merrow has demonstrated full transparency. Clara looked up briefly at her stepfather. In that glance, Ned saw the flicker of a 1,000-yard stare, the kind he'd seen on soldiers returned from ambushes, the kind that said, I'm surviving somewhere else inside my head. She wasn't watching the trial. She was enduring it. The next witness was a headmaster, grey-haired and dignified, who launched into character testimony that sounded polished enough to have been practiced over brandy. Mr. Merrow was always an involved parent, he said. Attended events, responded promptly, never raised his voice. I had no reason to suspect anything inappropriate. Ned tuned him out. He watched Clara. Her hands were folded, thumbs tucked in her fists, her eyes down, unmoving. The only motion was an occasional tremble in her jawline. Then she shifted slightly. Her sleeve slid up just an inch. This bruise wasn't old, fresh, oval-shaped, right where an adult's thumb might press. The stepmother wasn't concerned. She watched the headmaster with polite interest, hand still on Clara's shoulder, posed, not comforting. Suddenly Clara looked up. Her eyes swept the courtroom, then paused on his. For the second time they stared at each other. The message was clear. Do you see it? Ned gave the smallest nod. He wanted her to know that someone saw past the lies. The stepmother noticed. With cool control, she leaned sideways, whispered in Clara's ear, then shifted to block Ned's view. The headmaster finished. Court took a brief recess. As Merrow rose and walked to the counsel table, his hand briefly dropped onto Clara's back. It looked like a casual pat. She winced. It wasn't theatrical. It wasn't even visible to anyone but Ned. But it was there. That sealed it. He wasn't watching a bad man lie. He was watching a predator test a courtroom's blind spots. Merrow whispered to his lawyer, hand still on Clara's back. The stepmother placed her hand over his, a family united against false accusations. Ned's breath remained steady, but inside something coiled. He'd held formation during terrorist alerts when every instinct screamed to move. But this was different. This wasn't about law. This was about a little girl trying not to cry in public. The judge re-entered. People stood. Ned did too, eyes never leaving Clara. She didn't flinch this time, but she didn't smile either, just returned to her practiced posture, shoulders straight but somehow small, hands folded, eyes down. As the jury filed back in, Merrow resumed his seat. His lawyer straightened her blouse, prepared her final statements. The judge cleared his throat, a sound like gravel being stirred. Before we conclude preliminary arguments and enter deliberations, I would like to acknowledge the commendable behaviour exhibited by Mr. Merrow throughout these proceedings. His restraint, his professionalism, rare qualities in times when emotion often overrules reason. Clara's eyes dropped lower, her thumbs pressed tighter into her palms. Then the judge looked at her, just briefly. "And I commend the child for being here. It is not easy to watch adults handle such delicate matters. I trust she understands. She is well looked after." Ned felt his own fingers curl involuntarily. The girl didn't even blink, because she knew that wasn't true. The judge's praise still echoed in the wood-panelled chamber as the courtroom quieted for closing statements. Lawyers exchanged final notes, and jurors sat expressionless, their eyes dulled by hours of polished testimony designed to bore rather than illuminate. Ned stayed rigid, but inside he was tracking every breath from the girl. Clara hadn't moved for nearly 40 minutes, not until now. As Merrow shifted in his chair, stretching his arms theatrically, his fingers brushed across the back of Clara's head, just a graze, but one that made her tense like a deer at the crack of a twig. "Don't," she mouthed, a whisper so small it might have been imagined. The woman beside her placed a gloved hand in her lap, unmoving. Her eyes stared straight ahead, a sculpture of composure. The judge took a sip from his water glass, the liquid catching light from the tall windows. He began adjusting his notes with the self-important rustling of a man who believes paper sounds more official when handled audibly. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, in matters such as these, where evidence is interpreted through the lens of bias, one must consider the consistency of the accused's behaviour." Clara moved, so slowly it almost went unnoticed beneath the drone of the judge's voice. Her left hand lifted to her face, fingers brushing a lock of hair. Then she did it. A closed fist. Opened. Pressed against her opposite palm. Twice. To the untrained eye, it was nothing. A nervous twitch. A fidget. Maybe a child brushing away a fly or adjusting an errant strand of hair. But Ned knew better. It was the children's distress signal, taught in schools, protection seminars, military briefings, and trauma workshops across the country. A silent cry for help from someone who couldn't speak safely, who was being watched, who was in danger. He'd seen it once before, in a domestic shelter years ago, during a palace outreach event. A little boy had done the same thing to a volunteer soldier. The boy had later been found locked in a storage cupboard by his guardian for hours each day. Ned's chest tightened like someone had cinched a belt around his ribs. He looked around the courtroom. No one else had seen it. Everyone's eyes were on the judge, who was rambling about presumption of innocence and the burden of proof. Clara lowered her hand, almost ashamed. Like she'd tried to reach across a vast canyon and found no one on the other side. But Ned had seen it, and that meant it was real. Across the aisle, Julian Merrow leaned back in his chair, crossing one leg over the other, with the practiced ease of a man who believes rooms exist for him to fill. His smile was faint, almost imperceptible. But it was there. The same smile a wolf makes after the sheepdogs fall asleep. Ned's body went still, in a way that wasn't civilian stillness, but soldier stillness. The coiled potential of movement, not the absence of it. The Royal Guard had long trained him for endurance, for watching, for waiting. But there came a time when even stillness had to break. The courtroom walls felt closer now, the air thicker. The girl had spoken, without words, and she'd spoken directly to him. It was a signal and a dare. Do something. Ned rose from his seat without a sound. Not a rustle, not a shuffle, just the quiet, precise motion of a soldier standing when the moment demanded it. When retreat meant surrender. When the worst thing wasn't action, but inaction. Heads in the back rows turned first, then a few along the benches. No one spoke. It was too strange to process. A man standing, stone-faced, unmoving, in the middle of courtroom protocol. The judge continued speaking, unaware of the disturbance in the gallery, his voice droning on about precedent and procedure. And in that context, we must weigh testimony not just on emotion, but on legal merit. "Your Honour," Ned said, calm, firm, projected across the room like a military command, wrapped in courtroom etiquette. Not shouting, just impossible to ignore. Judge Green paused mid-sentence, frowning over his glasses, like someone had interrupted his favourite song. "Yes? Sir, this is not a public forum for interruption." Ned stepped forward. He didn't storm. He didn't rush. He advanced with the measured, deliberate pace of someone walking toward a flag being burned. "I am Staff Guard Edward Holbridge, of the Royal Household Division," he said, "and I am bound by duty to respond to signs of endangerment." Green blinked, the rhythm of his courtroom disrupted. "I don't care if you're the Archbishop of Canterbury. This is a courtroom, not the parade ground. Sit down, or you'll be escorted out." A security officer near the exit shifted slightly, uncertain whether to intervene. A murmur swept through the gallery like wind through dry leaves. Ned didn't move. The child seated by the defendant gave the international distress signal. "I witnessed it clearly." Gasps rippled. One juror turned toward Clara, confused. The girl sat frozen again, eyes wide, hands clenched in her lap. Green's irritation rose visibly, his face flushing. "This is absurd! Bailiff, remove him!" "She is signalling for help," Ned cut in, louder this time. "You ignore that, and you ignore your oath. She is in danger." The courtroom stirred, suddenly awake. The stepmother leaned toward Clara, whispering sharply in her ear. The girl flinched, a small involuntary motion like she'd been pricked with a needle. Merrow's lawyer stood, smoothing her skirt. "Your Honour, I must object. This is unverified. This man is not a qualified witness." "I'm not testifying," Ned replied. "I'm intervening." "You will do no such thing," Green snapped. "This girl is under legal guardianship. There's no cause for disruption. Sit down or be removed." Ned took one more step forward. "I've seen that signal in war zones, from women who weren't allowed to speak, from children taught that silence kept them alive. That little girl is crying for help in the only way she can." "Enough!" the judge barked, red-faced now. "You are not qualified to interpret the mental state of a child from a distance." And then he made a mistake, a small one, and a sentence that changed everything. "She is the defendant's daughter now," the judge said with a patronizing wave, "and she knows her place." There was a silence sharper than any shout, a pause that rang like a siren through the wood-panelled room. Ned's head tilted just slightly. She knows her place? That was it. That was the moment. He advanced. 2 more steps, then he stopped, still 5 feet from the bench. "The only place she belongs is far from him." Security stepped forward, uncertain but following protocol. Green pointed. "Remove him now!" And in that second, Merrow turned, grinning smugly at Clara like nothing could touch him. A look that said, "See, I told you. No one will believe you." That's when Ned moved, 1 step, smooth and lethal. The courtroom barely registered the slap before it echoed. Not a wild blow, not an attack. A soldier's strike, clean, precise, the flat of his palm connecting sharply with the judge's cheek. Green stumbled backward, glasses slipping sideways, stunned silence flooding the courtroom. Gasps, shouts. The bailiff froze. But Ned didn't go further. He turned to Clara. Her eyes, wide brimming, had locked on him. The girl stood and ran straight to him. The courtroom exploded. Clara ran, past the stunned stepmother's outstretched arm, past the frozen row of jurors. She crossed the floor with all the speed and silence of a child who had waited far too long to be believed. She collided into Ned's side, her arms wrapping tightly around his waist. She didn't sob. She didn't scream. She just held on like someone drowning who'd finally found something solid in a storm. Ned wrapped one hand around her shoulder and turned his body to shield her from the judge, from the flashes of phones now raised, from the gasping voices ricocheting around the room. The courtroom was chaos. "Security! Detain that man! Now!" Judge Green's voice cracked into the din, but it carried none of its former authority. His cheek burned red with the outline of Ned's gloved hand. He fumbled for his gavel, but struck it against the bench with more desperation than command. The bailiff stepped forward, but hesitated. He looked at the girl, clinging to Ned. He looked at the line of bruises on her wrist, now fully visible. The blue shadows not hidden by sleeves anymore. And he did not advance. "Someone remove that child from him!" the stepmother shrieked, her composure finally shattered. "Clara, get back here now!" "She's not going anywhere," Ned said. His voice wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. But it was the voice of a man who would not move. Not for a gun, not for a tank, not for a judge in a courtroom. The female officer stationed by the entrance moved first. She cut through the noise, stepped over the rail, and knelt slowly beside the girl. "Sweetheart," she said softly, "can you let go for a second? Can I talk to you?" Clara didn't move. "She's lying," Merrow shouted, standing now. "This is madness. She's scared of the man who just assaulted a judge, that's all." "She's scared of you," Ned said without turning. "I saw her flinch when you touched her. I saw her bruises, and I saw her make the signal." "What signal?" Green barked. "I saw nothing. That girl is—" "She showed the universal hand signal for distress," the female officer interrupted calmly. "Fist open, pressed to palm. It's used by victims who can't speak openly." The room shifted. "What nonsense is this?" the judge said, but the words rang hollow now. The officer knelt lower. "Clara, can you tell me if someone hurt you?" The girl hesitated. Then she nodded. "Once. Sharp. Final." The officer turned to the nearest constable. "I need social services and a forensic team now. We're escalating this case." The stepmother shrieked something unintelligible, trying to cross the aisle, but two security officers blocked her path. Merrow's face drained of colour. "This is outrageous! Fabricated! Do you know who I am?" Ned turned for the first time to look him in the eye. "I know exactly who you are," he said. "And so does she." Clara stood still beside Ned, her tiny frame trembling as though she expected someone to yank her backward at any second, but no one did. The silence in the courtroom had shifted, from disbelief to something far more dangerous for Julian Merrow, realization. The female officer placed herself between Clara and the bench, facing the child, crouching low and speaking gently. "Clara, it's okay. You don't have to answer if you're scared, but I want you to know you're safe now." Clara's lips moved without sound. Then, barely above a whisper, "He said nobody would believe me, that the judge was his friend, that if I told anyone I'd get taken away." "She's been coached," Merrow barked. "She doesn't know what she's saying. This is absurd." Another voice chimed in, one of the jurors. "Excuse me, Your Honour. I saw her do the hand thing. I didn't know what it meant, but I saw it. Twice." Green's mouth opened, then closed. A second juror added, "I saw bruises too, on her arm." "And she wouldn't respond when he called her name," said a third. "It was like she was being handled." The courtroom was no longer a stage for Merrow's narrative. It had become something raw, dangerous for him. The audience had shifted from passive observers to witnesses. The female officer gently turned Clara's arms over, revealing more bruises, some circular, some linear. She didn't flinch this time. "I need a statement," the officer said quietly. "We'll do it somewhere safe, just you and a trained team. But I want you to know you did the right thing." Clara didn't answer. She just clutched Ned's hand. Police moved in on Merrow. "This is a violation of my rights," he shouted. "I've cooperated. I'm the legal guardian." One of the plainclothes detectives stepped forward with a badge and calm authority. "Not any more, sir. You're being detained on suspicion of child endangerment, coercive control, and potential abuse. You have no cause, no warrant. We have probable cause. We have corroborating observations, a distress signal, and an active child protection concern. That's enough to remand you while we investigate." The stepmother stood, screaming as she was restrained. "This is a conspiracy. A soldier hit a judge in the middle of trial. You're going to let that stand?" Green pounded the gavel again. "This court is adjourned." But the gavel wasn't the loudest sound anymore. The loudest sound was the silence of a courtroom no longer on Julian Merrow's side. As officers guided Merrow away, his eyes found Clara's. The slick veneer of his smile was gone. "I'll fight this," he hissed. Ned stepped forward, blocking his view. "You'll fight it from a cell." Outside the courtroom, Clara sat on a bench beside the officer. Her feet didn't touch the floor. Her hands fidgeted slightly, her body slowly decompressing from months, maybe years, of being too still. Ned sat beside her, a butterfly bandage on his knuckle where he'd caught it on the judge's glasses. She looked up, eyes heavy with something more than exhaustion. "You saw me," she said. He nodded. "You didn't look away." "I couldn't," he replied. "You made sure I couldn't." A moment passed. She leaned her head lightly against his sleeve. A policewoman nearby said, "Social care will come shortly. We've got a child advocate waiting upstairs. They'll make sure she's placed somewhere safe. No institutions, no panic." Clara nodded faintly, but didn't move her head from Ned's arm. Across the corridor, the sounds of Merrow being led down a stairwell echoed faintly. Raised voices, the clatter of expensive shoes resisting against the dignity of handcuffs. The stepmother's shrieks had faded into bitter muttering behind a closed door, now in custody herself for obstruction and knowingly facilitating abuse. Inside the small waiting area, the air had shifted. No more court formalities, no more objections or titles, just the stillness of a child who had survived being invisible, and the man who had chosen to see her. Ned looked down at her. "You were brave." Clara's fingers curled around his jacket sleeve. "I didn't feel brave." "That's how bravery works," he said. "It doesn't feel like anything at all until afterward." She tilted her head, thoughtful. "Will you be in trouble?" He paused. "Maybe, but if I had to do it again, I'd stand up sooner." Clara smiled. The first real one. Not polite, not grateful, just human. The advocate arrived, soft-voiced, gentle-eyed, armed with a clipboard and a warmth that didn't feel forced. Clara stood slowly, still gripping Ned's sleeve until the very last second. "Can I see him again?" she asked the advocate. "We'll make sure of it," the woman replied. And then, just before turning, Clara looked up at Ned and said, "When I grow up, I want to be like you. Someone who doesn't stay quiet." Ned smiled, but said nothing, just gave her a slow, precise nod, the kind a soldier gives to someone who's earned it. And then she was gone, disappearing through the doors. But this time she wasn't being taken. She was being carried forward. Outside the courthouse, the sky had clouded over. A few reporters lingered near the barriers, confused and whispering. Word hadn't fully spread yet, but cameras had been rolling inside, and it wouldn't stay quiet for long. Inside, in a side room beneath dim fluorescent lights, Ned sat on a bench with a bandage wrapped around his knuckles, not from the slap, but from how tightly he'd clenched his fist afterward. The adrenaline hadn't fully faded. Across from him, Detective Inspector Mallory reviewed the initial reports. "You know they're going to investigate the assault," she said, tone even, but not unkind. "I know," Ned replied. "But between the distress signal, the physical evidence, the multiple eyewitness accounts, it's not going to stick. You didn't break a law, you broke a courtroom." He looked at her. "Would you have done the same?" Mallory considered. "I like to think so," she said, "but I'm not sure I'd have seen it. Most wouldn't." He glanced through the glass window where Clara sat on a padded chair, wrapped in a grey blanket someone had fetched from evidence storage. She was sipping a juice box, legs swinging slightly. She looked like a child again. Social workers were already filing emergency transfer forms. A full child protection team had arrived. Merrow would remain in custody while police searched his home and his devices. They'd already found enough in his messages to justify a deeper dig. Sir Malcolm Green, red-cheeked and shaken, had left under police escort. The Judicial Conduct Board had been notified. Everything was shifting now, and fast. Later that evening, after giving a full recorded statement and signing his own incident report, Ned stood at the doorway as Clara was led toward a waiting car. The female officer guiding her paused when the girl tugged her sleeve. "Can I say goodbye?" Clara whispered. The officer nodded. Clara walked over, her blanket trailing behind her like a cape. She reached up and took Ned's hand. "Are they going to be mad at you?" she asked softly. "Some will," Ned said, "but not the ones who matter." She nodded like she understood perfectly. Then, rising slightly on her toes, she whispered, "I wasn't brave before, but when you stood up, it made me feel like I could be." Ned blinked once. "You didn't need me to stand first. You already had." Clara climbed into the car, the door shut behind her. No panic, no fear, just a child leaving a courtroom with her name intact. And for Ned, that was enough. Would you have recognized Clara's signal before it was too late? Do you think a soldier should always follow orders or follow their conscience when a child is at risk? And if you were sitting in that courtroom, what would you have done? If this story moved you, tap the like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful Royal Guard stories just like this one. Don't forget to press the bell icon so you never miss a daily upload. And please share this video with someone who should know the international distress signal. It might help them save a life one day. Our other stories should be appearing on your screen right now. Go watch them next. We'll see you tomorrow at the same time with a brand new story that'll stay with you long after the final frame.